So like Orville said, well, two things Orville said. One is if you didn't see the exhibit today or you haven't seen it before, this was my third time doing a walkthrough today. And I was telling these guys behind stage, every time I see it, it's more powerful and more of an awakening of where we really are right now in this moment. And we've been here for a while. This isn't new, right? And you just see how long we've been here. And Susan, Mycelis, and Orville, who curated this exhibit, were talking about this has been a 20-year work in progress. And how over the 20 years of doing it in Beijing and San Francisco and all these other places, they keep having to add because things just keep getting worse, clearly. And so I think it's so easy, even for a lot of us who work in sustainability or climate or food or any of it, to just, it's so hard to stay in reality with what's really happening around us. And spending time on these 3 floors really puts you in reality, really makes you want to act, and just really makes you want to do better. So and it's incredibly, like, just stunning, the whole thing. So I suggest that everybody take the time, if not today, another day, and see Coal and Ice. Now, I'd like to thank my 3 guests tonight, Uma, Gary, and Chloe. The reason we're doing this is because another big factor, like Orville said, about climate is food and our food system. And I think everyone who's here tonight knows our food system is not really good for anyone. It's not good for it's not good for people. It's clearly not good for the animals and industrial agriculture, and it's absolutely terrible for the planet. And so I've asked these 3 to come and talk about everything from how we got here to solutions to innovation. And so we're going to start with Chloe because she wrote this incredible book, which I also suggest you read. And it's seriously like an expose of what really is happening in the meat industry, and it's awesome. So Chloe, we're going to start with you. She's going to give us a little talk about her thoughts on all of this, and we'll go from there.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. It's so amazing to be here with all of you. I'm only a little bit over a week out of surgery, and so I would not be here if it wasn't for such a great audience and for such an important topic to talk about. I'm Chloe Sorvino. I head up food and agriculture coverage at Forbes, and so that's given me a very interesting lens, I'll say, to kind of go through all, being the climate, food, agriculture, drinks, everything reporter for us. And it really led me to write this book, Raw Deal. So how we got here and why we need to so desperately and drastically change. In short, this industry has, in the matter of 5, maybe 7 decades tops, has really prioritized profits over people and redesigned the entire operation around that. And, I'm a financial journalist. I'm also a bit of an investigative journalist, as the book gets into. How's my sound? Is this better? Good. Okay, great. I'm seeing nods. Awesome. So, prioritizing profits over people, that's a lot to talk about, and what does it really mean? Unfortunately, in the meat industry, it's really led to everything from public health crises to water pollution, air pollution from methane emissions, and a whole lot else. But it really started, we can say around from the 80s onward. Orville wrote a book about the meat industry in the 80s, so it's pretty much starting from exactly where you left off. But the financial deregulation that came with the Reagan administration really pushing through executive orders that ushered in a wave of mergers and acquisitions, and that entirely put meatpacking on the chopping block and started this wave of consolidation that has not stopped. It's only gotten worse. And I think we can talk about consolidation. There's a lot of consolidation in a lot of industries, but it's the most drastic in the food industry, and specifically in the meat industry, which is kind of the kind of crown jewel of how our food system operates. And so it wasn't just this financial deregulation, though. It really was that combined with more mounting pressure to profit at all costs, with more quarterly earnings, getting shareholder returns, and doing that in a way that, again, has left the animals on the line, left the workers fighting antibiotic-resistant diseases and a whole host of other things, and there's violent workplaces, has had communities around production, dealing with not only, more average miscarriages and asthma in these communities, but it's also created a situation where it's really normal in a lot of these communities for kids to be working at the plants on the outskirts of town, and these are extremely dangerous jobs. Kids are dying in some of these plants. They are getting hurt, severely hurt. There's amputations. I mean, it's no joke. And so my book goes into all of this. It's really framed around climate change, but it also is framed around this kind of idea that the status quo you need to talk about the finances that are underpinning the system, or else you can't really talk about changing the status quo. And so it really wasn't just this financial deregulation, but it's what kind of created the jump start here. Essentially then, otherwise, in around 1970, they created the feedlot. How many people here know what a CAFO is? Anyone? Yeah, okay, great. So as we know, these completely changed what animals had traditionally eaten, and also completely changed where the industry actually was located. So we have, not only are these animals being fed corn to get fattened up quicker and cheaper, just right before they go to the slaughterhouse, they're also being fed antibiotics for growth at, just again, so they can grow fatter, quicker, cheaper. And then all, in the dream, in the goal of creating more and more meat, without thinking about really any of the hidden costs that then we all still have to bear. And it's really, it's become quite serious. I've spent a lot of time with workers, and when we get to questions later, I'd love to talk about, if there's more interest there, I'd love to go into some of this a bit deeper, but there's wage manipulation that's come from a lot of this consolidation. There is a host of recent class actions around how these workers have been marginalized, and I just want to be clear about this. These are some of the most vulnerable workers in America. Many of the workers in slaughterhouses are immigrants, many of them refugees. Some of them are getting the first kind of start in this country, and those are the jobs that they're getting, and they're now being forced to work in these really sometimes hard, abusive conditions. So I think we should be clear about that as we're talking about feedlots and CAFOs and all these kind of big words like consolidation, because at the end of the day, there's people behind all of it. So my book goes into all of that, and it also goes into, where we are now, right? And because there has been so much concentration and so much consolidation, right now we're in a place where the beef industry is more than 85% controlled by the top 4 players. And when you think about consolidation, if the top 4 players in a sector have more than 25%, typically that's considered a highly concentrated industry. So again, the beef industry is at 85+%, pork's at 70, chicken's at 60. When my book came out, it was actually at 50, but there's been more mergers since then. And it's not just kind of financial terms, it's not just kind of numbers on a spreadsheet. There's a bunch of really real ways that this consolidation has impacted us all today. So I've got 2 very different examples. There are countless more that the book goes into that we can talk about here, but I'm hopefully trying to set up these great people to kind of take it from where we've been to where we're going. But here are the 2 examples. So let's talk about avian flu. Has anyone been hearing about the raw milk and avian flu? Is this on people's minds right now? Because it's been on my mind for probably way too long. But it's been the worst outbreak in our history. It's been raging since 2022. It's been a big deal to farmers, but it hasn't actually kind of gotten as many mainstream headlines until more recently, when it's come back with a vengeance. Not only has this new strain been mutating to cattle for the first time, and to dolphins and other mammals, but it's also had its 3rd confirmed case by the CDC just this week in its third human here. In this case, these strains are like extremely serious. One of the two strains that's very popular right now is actually 50% deadly in humans, according to the CDC. So these zoonotic diseases have been bred from how closely packed together these animals are and how the production has really changed to make it just as quick and efficient as possible. But it's really not quick and efficient when you think about all these other ramifications and the waste and the pain and the taxpayer money even that has to go to actually killing these birds when they get infected in the first place. But the reason I want to bring this up in terms of consolidation is actually because, one of the other reasons that this has spread so much, when feedlots were, invented in the 70s and 80s, became really popular through the 90s, they were erected from scratch, essentially. So they built them out in the corn, out in the countryside. And the slaughterhouses that had been, so close to the cities, ended up closing up shop, moving out to the countryside with them and building essentially the biggest plants that this industry had ever seen. And it was out very far away from where people are by design, so it could be hidden and the harms could be hidden. But as they moved all the way out to the Corn Belt and had now the dozen or so plants that produce the vast majority of the chicken in this country, they're all pretty close together, all considered, and they're all essentially through this Corn Belt, through most of them aren't anywhere through the middle of this country, and that also happens to unfortunately be where the wild birds fly over, the main migratory wild bird fly zone is. And so because it's been so centralized and consolidated in this one specific location, and it really didn't have the foresight to think about, geographic diversity or the impacts of this, now that's helped this avian flu spread even more, drastically so. And it's just, again, by our design flaws. So that's one example. The other example, and again, these are very different, and there are so many, but I want to bring this one up too because a key part of my book is all about JBS, the world's largest meat packer. And essentially another way that consolidation and centralization has impacted this country is it's made this country extremely vulnerable to foreign influence and corruption. And the JBS story is an extreme example of that, but it is happening a lot of other places too. But so I'll tell you this story, because JBS is a very unknown company, all considered, although it's the world's largest meat packer, one of the biggest food companies by revenue in the country. It's a publicly traded company in Brazil. It's run by these Brazil billionaires named Batistas, Joesley and Wesley Batista. They're brothers, and there's a big family around them, but this is important because there's a lot of environmental and other concerns along with it. So these brothers essentially had this major dream of coming to America, making their small family Brazilian butcher this massive international dynamo. And they did it within a few short years. And the way that they were really able to do it, which is, my book details it, it's pretty much the most comprehensive behind-the-scenes telling of this, and I'm kind of skipping the headline, which is all the bribery and the jailing and the kickbacks involved, but we'll get there. So they did this really from going to America, buying up the companies that were for sale because they were struggling. And why were there not that many other bids? There were a few bidding wars, but there really weren't a lot of bids. And that's actually because there was so much consolidation already in a lot of these key markets that they didn't really have competitors who could bid against them. And so they were able to buy these companies for quite cheap. Tyson couldn't bid because they already had 22% of the beef industry. And when you have that much, if you do another acquisition, antitrust regulators are going to have a lot of scrutiny on that, even in these times. So JBS pretty much came in super quick with all this money and bought up a bunch of these, some of the most iconic meatpacking assets we have, and became the second biggest meat player in America through that. But what were these funds related to? As I had kind of alluded to earlier, crazy bribes, a massive kickback scheme in Brazil that ensnared thousands of politicians, including three of Brazil's presidents, including the current one that's sitting. And they were essentially these guys doing these deals, literally, passing bags of briefcases of money and all that. One of the billionaires wore the wire that indicted, one of the presidents initially. And, they've been come clean about it. They have pled guilty. The two billionaire brothers served 6 months in jail. They paid fines. They've been trying to get lower fines in America. But they have paid fines, and they've settled with American government and the Brazilian government. And so now they're just kind of able to sit pretty on what they've acquired with some illicit funds. And it's kind of shocking when you think about it, because this company is still, one of its biggest customers is the U.S. government, for crying out loud. They get hundreds of millions of dollars in payments from the government for school lunches and military meals, nursing homes that take Medicaid, and they've been able to do that and continue to hold it and not have scrutiny, because at the end of the day, the USDA has said all we really care about is buying meat as cheap as possible, and they're not going to take someone out of the pool that will impact that, and they prefer that over any kind of allegations or any connection to corruption, and that's pretty shocking, especially when you consider that the federal government has also been recently investigating child labor at these plants, as I mentioned, and JBS actually was the company that had the most children working for and the most children injured and had to pay the biggest fines. It's also a company that's been trying for years and years to go public in the US, but most recently hasn't been able to because of scrutiny on its IPO because of deforestation that they are allegedly doing in the Amazon. This is a company that has had so many lawsuits against it, from workers for alleging discrimination to serious environmental crimes from indigenous communities and a lot else. So this is, again, just one extreme example of how this consolidation has led to players that now we can't really take out of the system. This is now the status quo that we're dealing with as we face climate crisis, and that climate crisis is getting worse and worse by the day. And these are the companies that are going to have to step up or get out of the way, essentially. And I wanted to bring up JBS too. Uma, maybe you can talk about them or not, but maybe we'll have a question. Aside from the Amazon deforestation allegations that have been coming for years, they also have been getting sued by the New York AG for because of their climate goals, but also at the same time, they're building the biggest lab-grown meat, cultivated meat plant in Spain. It should be opening, I think, later this year. They claim it's going to be the world's largest once it opens. We'll see. They also shut down their plant-based business after a year, just because. And they have a lot of skin in the game with the crisis that we're all facing, and how they deal with it will be, it'll be really important for us all. So I think that's just a little bit of a way to kick this off, and I'm super excited to answer any questions. The book goes into a lot more from what really is good meat, which I know Gary's going to talk about too, and to like the financing boom and bust with plant-based foods that's been happening recently, and just really how profit and how you're profiting and why you're profiting really kind of underpins all of it. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. So we're going to move to Gary, who is now the Chief Organic Optimist at Stonyfield, which is an awesome title. And we're going to move more toward solutions and innovation.
Yeah, because it's good we're all on the ground floor. There's no building to jump off of here. But I'm a Chloe fan, and I just want to say I'm so appreciative of this reportage. If you step way, way back for a second, I actually began my career in a very esoteric aspect of climatology called dendroclimatology, which is looking at advancing tree lines as evidence of climate change, so altitudinal or latitudinal, and you'd be forgiven if you had never read my thesis. But what as I started to understand what was going on with climate change back in the 70s, I started to recognize that there's basically these are like our modern day myths that we've built our industry on. One of the myths is that there's a place called away, right? That's really the story of climate change. We send it up and off it goes. And of course, we now know there is no away. Another is, and this is really the story of this industry that she's been following, is that nature is our subsidiary, that the earth is there for our taking and our dumping, when in fact, of course, every bit of human anything, commerce, culture, is a result of us being a subsidiary of a bountiful earth. And it's our ignorance of that that's causing these feedback systems like the avian flu, which is now even in Antarctic seals, to give you a sense of what's going on there. So my favorite philosopher is Lily Tomlin, and she says it got a lot worse before it got worse, and that's kind of that story. So I put some notes together because I've been doing a lot of speaking here recently on a variety of topics, and this will help me to stay organized. But I want to just quickly take you through a brief career trajectory. But yes, it's all been about solutions, and I'm blessed and fortunate to sit here and tell you that most of them have incredible promise, and I'm sitting next to somebody who's going to talk about some more solutions. I will just say right at the outset, I'm not opposed to livestock agriculture. In fact, I farm in New Zealand, and I have sheep and cattle and llamas and chickens, and it's all regenerative and organic. But the contrast between what we just heard about and what my colleagues and I do is stocking rates. First of all, these are animals that are living, they're herbivores, not carnivores, right? They live and they consume herbs and plants and grasses. And as we've learned now in New Zealand with regenerative organic systems, there's just an explosion of opportunity with introducing polycultures into our pastures. What that means is a lot more species than the 2 or 3 grass species that you would see across, most grasslands. If you came to our regenerative organic farms in New Zealand, you would see the cows standing up to their haunches in what looks like a flower garden, chicory and mustards and all kinds of legumes. And the cows live twice as long as they did when they were as conventional. The antioxidants, I jumped to the present. I'll just back up a second. I started in the organic yogurt industry in 1983. So I'm at that stage of life where I try to remember what decade it was, not what year. And of course, nobody was eating yogurt and no one knew what organic was. So we always say we had a wonderful company back then, just no supply and no demand. But today Stonyfield's an $850 million a year, very successful organic company it's part of a now $70 billion organic sector, which is now $60 billion, forgive me. And we're roughly about 6% of total U.S. food. In Stonyfield's case, my proudest success is that we have about 1,400 farms. We've done some talking about I was also on the board of Applegate, and probably most organic companies you can name. I've been sort of involved because I've been around for a while, right? But my proudest achievement with Stonyfield is that of our roughly 1,400 to 1,500 dairy farms, the average herd size is 80 cows. You cannot make money with 80 cows as a conventional farmer. And what happens, the little secret about that is not only do you have lower stocking rates, which enable the animals to be healthier, but I just mentioned the polyculture. You can rotate your herds so that they'll visit a paddock, and 40 days later, the paddock will have been given total relief. They'll take it down to the nubble, and then off they'll go. And 40 days later, it's back up to full, diverse pasture, fully oxygenating, sequestering carbon down to a meter in depth, incredible biodiversity, and so forth. So, and I'll just mention too that not everything I do is organic, but generally we get the farms there sooner or later. I grew up in New Hampshire and watched a turf farm my whole life. It was a farm where they were pulling off grass for suburban lawns, and of course in so doing they're pulling off topsoil year after year after year. So by the time this thing went bankrupt 40 years in, there was no soil there. It was actually a sand pit, and it was beautiful river bottom land right near where I grew. And the town where we were raising our kids took it back for taxes because the turf company had by then taken advantage of its bounty and destroyed it. And we put an organic dairy farmer on there, and through a combination of pigs, hogs, and chickens and cover crops, brought back that sand pit, that sandy soil that was literally, most of the sand was hitting you in the face. And it's now a black, rich earth in about 8 years, and we have a $2.5 million diversified organic farm and vegetable operation there. So I have watched the recovery happen. I've been involved. I bought the farm. That's what I should have mentioned, and I helped this farmer get started. So and we're doing the same thing in New Zealand, where on top of everything else that right now. New Zealand banks on this green reputation. It's a bit of a high talk-do ratio because, in fact, 42% of New Zealand's rivers have nitrogen runoff because of bad dairy farming, because of densities, the kinds of things that Chloe's talking about. It is more of a grass-based system, but it is very, very dense because they're using corn as supplement and so forth. And so now they're having cyclones and climate events, and so this runoff is happening, but not on our farms. We have about 30 regenerative organic farms. There's literally zero runoff happening. And so I call it win-win-win-win farming, right? It's the animals are healthier and happier. They're basically eating what they were biologically evolved to eat. Obviously, there's no chemicals going into the system, no chemical fertilizers. And the punchline here is that these farmers earn about twice what they were earning when they were conventional on a net earnings basis. So time doesn't allow. Maybe in the Q&A we'll talk about just the wins, the proof points, being in the organic odyssey for the last 40 or 50 years. I'll just say it is the epitome of win-win-win agriculture, whether you're vegan or vegetarian or a meat eater or an aquaculturalist. We have incredible successes, ecological and economic. My farmers are all profitable, and one of the little secrets when you're milking 80 cows is you have time to do other things. You can be diverse in your income, so maple syrup, firewood, oats, you name it. So just before my brief time ends, I want to just quickly mention, for just to tee up a discussion, the 5 main things that I'm actually actively involved with right now. One I've already mentioned is this Brookford Farm, and it's just, we continue. The great thing is economically is when you improve the soils biologically, you need less horsepower year after year after year to till it up because you've built something called tilth, which is the natural friability of the soil. I mentioned perennial farms. That's the regenerative organic polyculture system in New Zealand. You will be hearing about this soon. The milk is the highest quality milk I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for a long time. I have my own farm, as I mentioned, but I'm also a very active investor and board member on more boards than I want to admit to myself, so I'm not going to tell you the number. But I'm an investor in over 25 organic and sustainable companies. I chair a couple of nonprofits. And I want to just quickly mention 2 that I think are very noteworthy for tonight. One is, by the way, on the perennial farms, our energy consumption is now 90% less than conventional. The farmers, like I said, are earning twice as much per hectare. So I'm involved also. I don't just do livestock and animal. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm very invested in an olive oil ice cream company that is killing it. It's mostly in Europe because, as Chloe hinted, there's been an interesting rise and fall of plant-based. It's basically we got over-skewed. It was too much investment in the spaces, as Uma will probably attest. And so there's been a kind of a correction here. But this olive oil ice cream, it's actually 95% water, 5% olive oil, but we've figured out a way to emulsify it so it's got the texture of Haagen-Dazs with 1/5 the saturated fats. It's called Wild Good. It's not on the shelves here, it's in Europe right now. But I'm also involved in a company, a mycelium bacon company near Albany, New York. And you've, of course, seen a couple of these plant-based meat companies. This is called My Forest Foods. And again, in the interest of time, I'll just say mycelium requires 98% less land, 99% less water to produce equivalent amounts of meat production. We are just doing bacon. You can find it here in New York. New York is our test area. On an acre, we can grow 1 million pounds of food with this mycelia bacon. 2 gallons of water, we can grow 1 million pounds of food. We have a capacity of 3 billion pounds. This is truly a solution for the future. Lest you think this is one of these, I used to say organic used to mean you have to chew extra, but I know there's been a bunch of plant-based products that are not so great. Check out this My Forest Foods. It smells, it crisps, Alice Waters, we were at Orville's house for dinner. Alice actually cried. She had a BLT. It was so good. Michael Pollan, confirmed vegan, now is constantly calling me, when does it come to California? It's incredible stuff. So there's really some amazing technology coming through the pipeline. And the last thing I want to just quickly mention here in this sort of scheme of, the fourth company I'm very excited about is an organic refillery in New Zealand. We have 8 stores. 0 plastic leaves the store. I have a lot of bad plastic karma, I'll be the first to tell. A few billion cups have gone out into the world. Trust me, it's the best possible polymer, the lightest weight, the most recyclable, the least toxic, etc. But it's still plastic. This is a chain of 8 stores. We're about to open a 9th. That's literally all bulk. Bring your jars in. We'll either fill them or you can refill them yourself. No plastic leaves these stores, and it's Gen Z material. It's doing really great. The last thing I want to just say very quickly is a watch out, because the thing that I'm most concerned with right now is the greenwashing in our space. There's this word regenerative that I'll just tell you right up front. Unlike certified organic, which is a set of laws globally, is verified, is certified, is third-party verified, and people have been busted with big fines and jail sentences when they violate it. There's no definition of this word regenerative. It's a walkout. It's a watch out. And I'll just simply say, to summarize a very long story, unfortunately, there's not only no definition, it's sort of in the beholder's vernacular, and a bunch of the companies that my colleague here has been covering are using this word rampantly. Generally, it means no-till. Generally, it's based on a myth that that tillage, which has been going on for 6,000 years, is bad for a climate. It's not true. It's a fabrication. If you are going to sequester carbon, which organic does, you have to do it down to 1 meter in depth. No-till only deals with the top couple inches. No-till also equals chemical fertilizer and herbicide. There are some very good practitioners out there trying to advance and work on this. But unless you see regenerative coupled with the word organic, buyer beware, and we can talk more about that if you're interested.
Can I say 2 things really quick?
Yes, please.
I'll say 2 things really quick. I love everything you just said, and also my book did not use the word regenerative for that reason. I only used multi-paddock grazing, which you had said, and the book also includes going to Eben Bayer's house, My Forest Foods founder. He has this amazing off-grid home that it's really underscores how much he really cares about.
Yeah, they also do leather and packaging. In fact, a very, very large company, I won't name it, they produce leather wallets that are now going to be made with mycelia. So very exciting.
I was up at their factory a few months ago, and it's astonishing. It's mycelium everywhere. It's incredible.
What you have to picture is it's a giant sort of, imagine 200 feet by 50 feet of a giant marshmallow.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
What it is.
And then you compress it, slice it, brine it, and it is bacon, and it is addictive.
And I also had the bacon there, and I've also had it at home. And I will say, when the chef at my forest made it, it was a little bit better than when I made it.
Yeah, it takes a little, there's a trick.
Yeah.
I can talk to you later.
Okay, good. I would like to know. Okay, well, thank you, Gary, for that. And so, since tonight is called Inventing the Future of Food, who better than to talk next than an inventor of the future of food? This is Uma Valeti. He's the founder of Upside Foods. He's the CEO. And we'll let you tell us.
Well, thank you, Beth. Well, great to be here in New York with all of you. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I'm here for this week. And I want to admit right away that I never thought this was going to be my fight. I did not think I'll be in the arena working on food. I grew up in India. The only thing I wanted to be when I grew up was a cardiologist. I wanted to train at the Mayo Clinic. I worked my behind off to get from India to the US. Multiple visa rejections later, I finally got my visa to get my medical degree here and also do cardiology training. But the story I'll tell you goes in 4 chapters. So the first chapter is why. So I grew up in India, like I said, and when I was 12, I went to a friend's birthday party. And there was a lot of fun in the front of the house, and I'm like, what's in the backyard? Let's go in there and see. And I walk into the backyard, or actually run into the backyard, and there I meet a lot of people who are slaughtering frightened animals for the birthday feast in the front. So it was like a shocking moment for me, and like sheer fun, joy in the front, and then sheer suffering in the back. And I'm like, birthday and death day at the same instant. It was very hard for me as a 12-year-old. It just left me shocked. And probably a common experience for many of you or maybe your children, but I loved the taste of meat. I just buried it in the back of my head, and I kept eating meat for many years after that. And then I went on to do cardiology. And in cardiology, we were working on stem cells. And stem cells are cells that are in every human or also animal that can grow into any part of the body or cells. And we were taking stem cells from the marrow, and I was re-injecting them into patients' hearts when they had a heart attack to regrow the heart muscle. And as I started doing these procedures, this thought kept coming back to me. What if we could do this with food? Can you take cells from an animal and grow it directly into food? Therefore, you can bypass even raising an animal and slaughtering an animal. And once that thought got into my head, it was really, really hard to put it away. And that was, I'd say, is the beginning. That's the first chapter. And there was no proof of science in food, but there was a lot of this proof that was building up in the medical literature where people were trying to grow organs and trying to regenerate parts of the body. So I tried to encourage a lot of people to start companies in the space. I never wanted to. I was really happy with cardiology practice. I was on the cutting edge of trying to save patients and resuscitating them. Started a couple of medical device companies, but I could not convince anyone to leave what they were doing and say they would want to start something like this, because it was high risk. It was never done before. And I was getting frustrated, and I was complaining to my wife and kids. And they finally talked to me and said, why are you not doing it? And that became the call to action. And I'd been complaining to them for many years. Actually, this is not just over a week or a month, for many years, and they finally got fed up. So that was the moment for me where I'm like, okay, so someone's got to do it. So I wrote to one venture capitalist. I had a basic science lab at the university that I had started. We did the proof of science at a very small scale at the lab. And the venture capitalist in California loved the idea. And they said, can you move the team to the Bay Area? I said, sure. I'll be there for 4 months. I didn't take any position in the company. I was not even on the incorporation papers. I thought I'll land a team there, magically put somebody to work, and then come back and do my work. Boy, I was wrong. Because when we started talking about this idea, nobody got it. Like, the VCs were just running away to the opposite direction, because there was no precedent to compare with, and they were not returning phone calls. So that was a big moment where I'm like, okay, this is not going to work if I don't quit. So before we got the company funded, I quit. I commuted from Minnesota to California for the first couple of years. My wife said she'll support me, and that's kind of how we built the company. We did the first proof of science, and we demonstrated that we could grow beef from cow cells with a beef meatball we displayed and showed in public in January 2016. And that set things in motion. We got a small amount of funding. And then the following year, we showed we could do this with chicken and duck. And that got us more funding. This was suddenly like everybody was interested. Like we did beef, we did chicken, we did duck. It was all of the proof of science concept. We were nowhere close to the cost of what you even want to hear about. The meatball, just the meatball cost $1,800 to make, right? So that was like a 30-gram meatball. But there was the proof of science, and people got excited, and we got a number of people to join us in the financing. And finally, we had the ability to actually start a professional-looking lab. And there we did a little more work to show, yes, we could go down the cost curve and start making enough, but we didn't know how to get this across into the commercial space because there were no regulations for this, right? All the regulations were FDA and USDA had for was raising an animal, slaughtering an animal, inspecting how the animal looks before it's slaughtered, and then after that to make sure there's good food handling practices. So the second chapter was to prove safety. So over multiple years, since 2018, we worked with both the FDA and the USDA because both of them wanted to regulate the space. So we had to work with two regulatory agencies over 4+ years, submitting a lot of information on how we can grow meat from an animal cell, doing the tests they asked us to do, nutritional analysis and all the compositional analysis. And finally, we got the FDA to sign off in November 2022 and the USDA to sign off in June 23. So just less than a year ago. So that was the proof of safety after intense amount of back and forth. The third thing was, does anybody care? Does it taste good? Right? So the next chapter was proof of taste. And I can tell you that we debuted the product in California in a restaurant for the first 7 months, and now we're taking it on the road in multiple states and doing proof of sale in multiple states in many events. And I can tell you that there's incredible reception for this because we're talking about meat. We're talking about real meat growing from animal cells. In fact, my favorite quote is from a Washington Post writer who basically came, discreetly as an investigative reporter, went to the restaurant we were serving and had the chicken fillet. And I think his quote, almost verbatim, is, "This is the most chickeny chicken I've ever had." And he also said it reminds him nostalgically of how chicken used to taste before the poultry companies got in and diluted the flavor of it by how the animals are grown to 4 or 5 times the natural weight. So there's a lot of the quotes like that. Eater came and also said something very similar. This meat does not look sickly white like the meat that we've gotten used to. And one of the chefs said this reminds her of La Belle Rouge, which is one of the most expensive birds or chickens grown in France. So what that tells us is great opportunity, great proof of taste. The next chapter, still unknown. There's a lot of skepticism, by the way. People absolutely are on both sides of this. Like, this is never going to scale. This is never going to work. And there's people on one side saying that this is going to be inevitable because ultimately we've got to figure out a way to feed people. And this next chapter is set up to show proof of scale. By that, what I mean is we've got to be able to manufacture much larger amounts of meat, millions to billions of pounds of meat, and be able to do that while decreasing the cost further. And keep in mind, we've already reduced the cost by 100+ since we've started 8 years ago. But there's still more to go. But the good thing is the following. Since we've started, there have been 170 companies started in the world in all continents except Antarctica. And that tells you that there's a lot of interest. There are lots of people who want to do this. Every major food and ag university in the world, like the top ones, have started undergrad and PhD programs in the space. There's about $3 billion of investment that has come into the space. 3 countries have approved cultivated meat, whereas 0 have had even 8 years ago. United States, Singapore, and Israel. And I think there's many more companies, and they're making salmon, they're making bluefin tuna, pork, bacon, there's chicken, duck, think beef, every kangaroo. There's also a new invented animal called qualia. So people are just really getting creative, and I think we're going to see a lot of these products come to the market. But there's only so much we can do in a matter of 10 years. Because there's nearly no other industry that I can think of where under a span of a decade, the amount of work of this type of magnitude in industry, in academia, and regulatory has happened. And I think if we just put this and step back in the context of like lots of other major innovations, I'd say we are on par or slightly ahead of how these transformative changes are happening. But there are not just technological and manufacturing challenges. There are actually social and political challenges. And if you have followed headlines lately in the last few weeks, Florida and Alabama have banned and criminalized making, selling, or marketing of cultivated meat in those states. Italy also has banned it in Europe. And by the way, we're not meaningfully selling in any quantities, but according to the words of one of the governors of the states, it is, again, I'm thinking verbatim here, is, I see these guys as a threat, and I'm going to snuff them out before they become a threat. So it tells you that there is an age-old industry that is looking to have some protection, and I think that goes to some of the things you're talking about. And here we are on one side. Innovation has always kept us feeding the people and in the growing populations. And it's poised very interestingly. Like I said, I never thought this was going to be my fight, but I've stepped into the arena, and lots of people are stepping into the arena. I think the next decade is going to be incredibly interesting with the convergence of practices you talked about, taking care of the earth and the animals. Plant-based, I think, is going to have a resurgence, and then cultivated meat is going to come back and do a lot more for both conventional meat and also plant-based to make one more tasty and also decrease the stress on the other to not have to meet the growing demand for meat. So I'm excited about the future.
Awesome. Thank you. I went, when Uma first opened his first factory in Emeryville, California, I went with my sister Suki, sister-in-law Suki, who's here, to see it one evening. And the first really crazy thing that I saw was, in contrast to all slaughterhouses and factory farms across the United States, where if you try to take a photo or step foot on property, you're arrested, right, and put in prison in a lot of cases. All the walls are glass, and so you can see everything being made through these glass walls. And it was like astonishing. And we went through this tour with Uma, and I was so excited and so happy, and like, this is the future, it's happening. And then we went back to your house, and I said to your wife, Marlene, I said, oh my God, this is happening. And she's like, no, Beth, we're at the end of one chapter and the beginning of another chapter. And I was like, wow, that's severe. But it's truly the bear went over the mountain in so many ways. But every time you make it over the mountain, and
there's another one.
There's another one, but you keep succeeding, and you keep beating a lot of huge odds, and here you still are, and it's going to happen, and it's happening. So congratulations.
I think if you look at all the innovation I've seen in like 40, 50 years, I would say determination is the most essential and undervalued attribute for success. So yeah, you just lean in.
Thank you. Yeah.
It'll happen.
So I'm sure there are people here who have questions for these three about anything that we've talked about, and there's already one there, but we're going to wait for the mics. So just raise your hand and a mic will come to you so we can hear you.
Thank you. You were all really fabulous. Thanks so much, and I learned so much. So the meat, Uma, it's not vegan, right? You can't call it vegan.
Well, yeah, the definition of vegan is evolving.
Post-vegan.
It's what?
It's evolving, because if your definition of being vegan is you don't want to kill an animal and you don't want to get food from killing an animal, then we don't have to keep raising and slaughtering and killing animals, but the meat itself comes from an animal cell. Mm-hmm. And so if your definition of vegan is, if it's coming from an animal, then yes, we're not vegan at all. We're definitely like a hardcore meat eater's dream. If they're a conflicted carnivore, like there's this group of people, I'd say, why, like, I mean, Chloe's book beautifully lays out a lot of challenges with meat. We know that their animals are raised, billions of animals, in intense overcrowded conditions, painful conditions. They're killed very young. We know that, intense animal agriculture, leading cause of climate change. We know that factory farms have incredible spillover effects of diseases, whether it's E. coli or salmonella or viruses. But despite all of that, meat demand is doubling. So if that demand is doubling, I think we've got to figure out a way to feed the conflicted carnivores, because we can't get our taste buds to be deprogrammed that quickly after 10,000 years of evolution. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's where cultivated meat can play a really good role, while other meat alternatives also continue to get better.
So, many doctors are encouraging people to eat far less beef. Will this be a problem, or is with your product?
It depends on what the reason for the dietary advice is from the physician, right? So if there is a risk for cardiovascular disease, and there is a very clearly established, like, high cholesterol, high atherosclerotic burden in the heart, the best treatments available for that are obviously diet, exercise, moderate calories. But there's also a prescription still for low saturated fat. Cholesterol prescription have been variable a little in the last 5 years, because dietary cholesterol always does not correlate with blood cholesterol. But if you have the right genetics, you don't need to worry too much about it. But in general, yes, lower meat consumption is associated with decrease in chronic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, as well as certain types of cancers. So I would say in moderation, more with processed meats rather than fresh meats.
Japan meat is a condiment. It's not the center of the plate. And there's, I'm stepping into Uma's area, but sort of legendary improvement over our diet and our heart disease. Large parts of the Mediterranean, same thing. It's about amount.
Mm-hmm. Possibly. I happen to be a vegan, and I love being a vegan. I love the thought of not participating in ruination of the climate, the water source, the animals mostly. So it's been good, and I'm pretty damn healthy. I wanted to ask you the name of your bacon.
It's called My Forest Foods. And you can Google it and see it around. We're building, we have a couple of farms, just again in the Albany area, and we're adding some more. I have vegan family members and vegetarian family members, and fortunately, all my family members, they have to eat organic. That's like a requirement. So I respect all choice here. I will just beg to differ on the climate point. It's not necessarily so. It's how the animals are grown. Ungulates are natural sequesters of carbon, and in the right densities, they perform incredible ecosystem services. So again, if there's a preference not to be involved in their killing or their eating, of course, I respect that, absolutely. And we should be eating less. When I was on the board of Applegate, it was eat less, but just eat better. But I will say this bacon delivers. So it's, the thing about bacon is it's the food that everyone wants and no one thinks we should be eating.
Exactly.
So check it out. It's pretty amazing.
I will. And quickly, Chloe, what is the name of your book, please?
Thank you for that. Raw Deal, Hidden Corruption, Corporate Greed, and the Fight for the Future of Meat. I will say that again. Raw Deal. Raw Deal.
Great, thank you.
It's a good deal.
It's a good deal. It's a really good book.
Thanks, and thank you for the panel. It's terrific. I had a question for the gentleman from Stonyfield, and you may not have a point of view, but the USDA has allocated a lot of money to regenerative ag, $3 billion, and I'm working with some people that are recipients. Do you know enough about the program to have a point of view? Is it successful? Do you like the strategy? $3 billion around educating and incentivizing American farmers on regenerative ag.
Yeah. I do know a lot about the program, and time doesn't allow all the things I'd like to say. again, I would just summarize this way, and I'm spending a lot of time at USDA right now, and with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and inside Whole Foods and Walmart and others, because I've been at this long enough. I remember when the word natural actually meant something. There's ice creams out there that don't change shape when they melt that say natural on the label now. I remember when the word sustainable meant something. I remember when, well, anyways, you've seen these labels come and go. The problem, there's an enormous lobby. You're absolutely right. I mean, $3 billion, I can tell you $3 billion has not been invested in the USDA's own property, which is the USDA organic seal, ever, in probably cumulative monies in research and so forth. The problem is there is no legal definition, and as I said before, the three entities that are for-profit that are trying to advance that definition and selling companies on it use basically no-till. You all know what no-till is, agriculture without tilling, without plowing, without turning over the soil, because there's been this latent and now proven to be obsolete point of view. Check out Rodale Institute and you'll see 40, 50 years of side-by-side trials where they've proven that actually tilled soils deliver much better carbon sequestration than non-till. But the problem is that a lot of the big food companies and a lot of the lobbies love this, because you can use this word that you can mean whatever you want, and you're not subjected to scrutiny or third-party verification, and you're also not inspected, and you also don't have to pay the freight. You don't have to do the organic standards. 3 years of conversions, shifting over to no antibiotics, no hormones, no pesticides, and there's also a couple of standards have some problems, like you can get 20% of your crop certified as regenerative and then call 100% of your crop regenerative. So it's an early stage that's been incredibly successful with lobbying, because again, there's this like profitable sort of feeding trough going on. But this is why I'm saying buyer beware. Buyer meaning us as consumers. But I say this to companies as well, because there's now a big blowback happening in the soil science community, saying this is bullshit. Excuse me, that there's a lot of claims about that tilling is this evil. It's not a one size fits all. It gets back to that simplistic thinking about a way and our other naive notions as humans. So it's not there yet, but yes, it's at the trough.
The mic's coming though.
Question for Uma about access to capital. A lot of that $3 billion, I suspect, went to a relatively small number of businesses. And you're at the point where you're starting to get much more capital intensive in terms of what you need to build going forward. And we're also in an environment where a lot of companies have really struggled to raise capital in the last 18 months, including in this sector. Is there any kind of bright light, any hope around that? What are the answers for people that are trying to raise money to support development in this area?
No, it's a terrific question. I think one of the must-haves is fuel to innovate and fuel to grow. And that's how we came here in a matter of 8 years. And if you really put that number into perspective, $3 billion, it's a little like 2.8 billion is what the industry has raised so far. It's nothing. It's like a drop in the bucket in comparison to what's gone into other innovations that are around us. Like, think about EVs, electric vehicles, batteries. It's not even going to build half a battery plant for you. But we're talking about a $2 trillion opportunity. And this is just the beginning. And I think majority of the funding has gone, I'd say, to less than 10 companies of that $3 billion. And we are one of the major recipients of it. And I think one of the things that needs to happen by default now is there's a lot of people that started companies thinking that they could go all the way through. But going all the way through is literally impossible because there's not unlimited amounts of capital for high-risk ventures like this. So I would assume maybe a few companies would be able to have the ability to go all the way through B platforms, which means they'll have the science, they have the engineering, they'll have the regulatory, then they'll have the products, and they'll have the ability to be able to tell the difference between their products and others and the whole story behind it. But the rest of them, I think, will have to figure out a way to plug into some parts of this ecosystem for the next few years until things get better. And eventually, this is going to require lots of companies to be in the space. But I'd say in the next 10 years, there's going to be shrinking and 2 or 3 platform companies emerge, and there'll be an ecosystem around them. And the following decade, I would expect like lots of major infrastructure coming into the space. The governments are going to be a really important thing, though. I think opening up regulatory, preventing these bans from kind of really becoming very anti-innovation, anti-competitive. The good thing is because these companies are all over the world, it's the loss of the country or the state that tries to ban them, because you can't play whack-a-mole. This innovation, there's got a lot of legs to it. Just to give you an example, South Korea just announced a free economic zone for cultivated meat in the last few weeks. China has put that in their next the 5-year plan. Singapore and Israel have done lots of approvals. Britain, after leaving the EU, is setting up their own approval systems. Netherlands gave $60 million in grants. So there's a lot going on globally. So I'm pretty excited, even if there's some setbacks here and there.
It makes the Florida and Alabama, the whole thing, look even stupider. The fact that we're banning this is ridiculous. And is there anything?
I'd be curious, actually, Chloe, has there ever been a history of banning conventional meat or anything?
I mean, no. And also, to your point, like the meat industry itself is against these bans, right? Like the main meat industry lobbying that's doing the same lobbying against climate and environmental regulations has come out against it.
Yeah.
It's completely anti-competitive. I mean, the meat industry needs to get more competitive, not less.
Yeah.
Can I say quickly to the gentleman who's leaving, you asked me, I just want to, I realize there is a ROC certification that you can, regenerative organic certification that is very far along, quite well thought out, and being embraced by really significant companies. So I want to distinguish between regenerative, non-organic, and the ROC, and I wish they would get a bigger piece of that pie.
Yeah, that's the only one that actually makes the companies share what their third-party suppliers and like what their environmental impact actually is, which is like the whole thing. So,
I have a question for Mr. Hirshberg. We have a growing population in the United States now. We're expected to be 400 million by the year 2050. You have your farming practices in New Zealand, which is a country of 4 million.
5.
5 million. More cows than people. With your farming practices, will you be able to feed a population of 400 million people, growing population?
Yeah, let alone 9
what will it take to get to that point?
Yeah,
will you be able to do it at a cost that everybody can afford? Because organic foods are not the lowest cost products in the market.
No, I'm so glad. Thank you for asking, because these are the central criticisms, right, or tropes that are marched out. So let me say, first of all, when you're in the yogurt business, you buy not just dairy, you buy a lot of stuff, right? Sugar and fruits and vegetables and so on. Across my supply chain, across it, yields by the time, once the farms get to scale, yields are comparable to conventional, but with far less inputs. And that's because you have to not just think about economic sustainability, you have to think about ecologic sustainability. And so my farmers, my first generation cows, there's a definite yield drop for sure. If you had a dairy farm and you converted those first, because you're sort of pulling out the needle, right? They've been used to a subsidy. But their second and third and fourth gen not only produce more on an annual basis, but over their lifetimes, because like I said before, they live twice as long. So the yield thing is not accurate, and we see this across all commodities. Right now, and on the price thing, I'll say carrots as an example, is 22% of US carrots now are organic. And now, some of those practices I don't necessarily subscribe to. Some of them are they're growing carrots in the wrong places, in the southern Central Valley, for example. in California where there's excessive water consumption. But why is it 22%? Because they've gotten to price parity. You can't find, if you buy organic baby carrots, there's hardly a difference. There may be 5 cents a package. And what you're seeing there is the supply and demand equation working well. Like I said before, we're 6% of U.S. food in total, with none of the subsidy that, we've both been starving when it comes to the subsidy. I mean, USDA, I said to this gentleman before, we are 6% of U.S. food. We've had about 1.1% of USDA research funding. I will say this administration is doing a lot better than ever in history. Tom Vilsack's second go around, and I don't always say, there's a bunch of things about Tom I wish we could really he could improve upon, but he has definitely come through and helped. But you're looking at apples and oranges, no pun intended, when it comes to the subsidies that underwrite, so-called cheap food. So yields is not the issue. I should also say nutrition is the issue. Food density and nutritional density is key. And in every one of the products we get, our densities are incredible. It's sort of the comment Uma was making. You know it when you're tasting it. And I mentioned the farmers with the lower stocking rates. That's actually an ecological strategy. It means basically we can get more dairy farmers into our system and not have it be concentrated in fewer. So it doesn't mean there's lower overall net volume. It just means there's more opportunity to be spread. So I don't believe in the yield problem. I believe that we have a nutritional solution. I also know that organic sequesters far more carbon. I mean, this is sort of statistically, well understood. And after all, that's really, wearing my grandfather hat now. We're not going to solve this climate crisis by slowing down. We have to start taking significant amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere. We've got to, and soil carbon sequestration is a critical part of that. We have to absolutely reduce or eliminate methane production. Methane's 240 times as impactful as carbon. And then nitric oxide, which is tied to chemical fertilizer, is the worst of all. It's like 300 to 400 times. So you got to get off the fertilizer dole. We got to get off the pesticide and herbicide dole, and we got to really be serious about sequestering. That's organic. Did I answer you? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I'll say very quickly, and this is really on Uma's behalf. I mean, I've been through the industry. The winds of investment have blown behind us and blown in our faces, and it sounds like you've been through some of that too. Yeah. It's the roughest time in my 45 years to raise capital now, but taste delivers, texture delivers, and this Gen Z consumer, there's vast amounts of psychographic. The Gen Z, 14 to 24-year-olds are 20% of consumers right now. They're going to be 40% by 2030. The number one standard that is meaningful to Gen Zs is organic, above cruelty-free, above all of it. But more than that, they want value. To your point, and they want transparency. They want to know. They want to be able to see what's on the label. They want to know who's behind it. And this is a great tailwind that is going to assist, those of us up here on the stage who are growing and selling things, if we stay loyal to that. For sure, we've had to overcome headwinds in investment and overcome absence of subsidy. But, my 32 ounce, the large size, which is the same whole milk that we started with when we had 7 cows in 1983, the same exact product, nothing has changed. That product is at about 4% premium to conventional because we have the volume. And Yoplait, General Mills has put Yoplait up for sale. This gelatinous stuff that was around for the longest time is probably, it's in trouble. So we continue to grow year after year after year. So it's a marathon, not a sprint, but the winds are definitely blowing behind us.
Okay, one more question, or two more questions.
Yeah,
You
okay.
and then Rachel.
I'll ask something that's more related to the topic, the future of food. And I'm so glad that this gentleman talked about, how the solutions that seem small scales right now could possibly lead to supporting the whole population and our population growth. I just want to know your thoughts, your opinion. If dinner is still a thing in the future, what do you see is going to be on our dinner table in the future, say 20 years later? And if we achieve a very healthy and sustainable food system by that time?
I'm making a case on Thursday that there'll be a really tender cultivated chicken on the dinner plate, and you'll go on Friday evening with your partner, and that is the highlight, besides your conversation.
Yeah.
What's going to be in your plate? Yeah.
No, I mean, the future with 9.6 billion we've got to decrease our meat consumption. We've got to decrease, it's an absolute necessity that we have a carbon consciousness, invading how we produce. This is this is an incredible area. The test will be taste and texture and price, right? I mean, that's at the end. For 40 years, I've always said I can ship the yogurt 3,000 miles. It's the last 18 inches that matter, If they spit it out, I've lost them, because you're not going to try it twice, especially since it does cost at the higher end. But so we have to deliver, but we've got to, for sure we're going to be more vegetarian-based, more vegetable-based, absolutely, because, again, it's just a dramatically lower footprint. And the adjustment that's happened that Chloe was referring to in the marketplace is nothing to do with taste. I was on the board of a company called Forager, cashew yogurt, incredible taste. It's just that, the buyers got nervous because there were 15 vegan yogurts out there and they were dividing up the pie and not, so now Forager is one of 4 or 5 and they're cooking. They're doing great. And you're seeing that across a lot of categories.
And I'll just add that I think there's going to be definitely a lot of fungi, a lot of mycelium root products, more tubers, more legumes, although I think we also have to be clear that the crops that go into these products are also going to be really climate stressed as well. So it's going to have to come from a lot of change across the board. We're talking about meat today, though.
Okay, and last question, Rachel, right there in the front.
Hey, Rachel, I didn't see you right in front. I view 2 things. One is my worldview. I think that's worldview is glasses half full. The second one is just the track record of having climbed some of those mountains when people said it's nearly impossible, and only 3 people said don't look back. Because if I had looked back, I think that was not a small hill. It was probably a drop to infinity. And I'm glad we didn't look back, we just kept moving forward. I feel like now there's enough track record to feel like, yeah, we've been in the arena long enough that we know that there's people that are ready to fight in the arena and will stay in it, and there's people that are fair weather, they'll jump in and out of the arena. So I feel like being there and taking some of the punches, I think gives a little bit more optimism. Sounds weird, but yes, actually getting hit a bit and saying we are going to keep going has been really good to give us that resilience.
What gives you hope?
So I actually didn't get to talk about bison at all tonight, but I'll go to the bison for a second, because I don't get a lot of hope these days. There are several companies that that were very hopeful to me that have recently gone bankrupt. Smallhold, the mushroom grower, being one. Cook's Venture, the Better Chicken company, being another. But what does give me hope is when communities are working together, neighbors working together to really take action and take a firm role in their food system. And I bring up bison because one of my favorite quotes in the book is from the Tonka Bar CEO, who says that when she gets scared or concerned about the climate crisis that's facing all of us, She thinks about bison because bison move in the herd, they move in the pack together through the storm. They know that they're going to get out on the other side of the storm. They go towards the storm and they keep going until they're out on the other side.
That's great. No, I mean, I think I started by saying I'm really blessed to have been in the solution side here. And I see around me, I run an entrepreneurship institute, so I have a few hundred Umas who come through and we help with cash flow and marketing and raising capital or being capital conserving and efficient. And I just see unbelievable innovation out there now in taste and texture, not just like, cell structure and, technology. So that's exciting. I see an industry, my own industry, that like I said, has not gotten its fair share of your and my taxes, and yet it has endured. And our compounded annual growth rate over the last 20 years, you could say it's from a smaller base, but it's dwarfed the conventional marketplace. Last year, in this inflationary post-COVID timeline, organic across all commodities grew faster than conventional. My nephew's in the organic beer business. And, craft beer is rough right now because it's so crowded. Organic craft beer is top rates in that sector. So I get a lot of hope from that. But mainly I get a lot of hope from younger consumers. This is the first gen who doesn't have to be lectured about climate change, right? I had to study it back in the 70s. The first book I read on this was called Inadvertent Climate Modification in 1970. You didn't read it? What's the matter with you? No one knew what the hell we were talking about. This generation's grown up with it. They're seeing hotter hots, colder colds. We're all talking about it. This generation has grown up with epidemic cancer rates. This generation has grown up with diabetes, autism, which we now know is linked to toxins in our environment, and they're responding with demanding real transparency and real accountability. And in the end, markets are going to trump what. No, that's a bad word here. Are going to be much more important than what government does, and ultimately that's where government. Right now, the lobby thing that he asked about, that's true. We're not, we don't have a democracy in that sense, but the markets are going our way. That gives me hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you all very much, and thank everyone for coming tonight.